Matthew Berry here, Newhouse class of '92 and ESPN senior fantasy analyst. Now, Mike asked me to talk about fantasy football, and the growth of fantasy football in America has been nothing short of amazing. According to research done by Ipsos Public Affairs and the Fantasy Sports Trade Association, check this out, 24 million people that are 12 years old or older play fantasy football. 24 million. That's an increase of 13% from just last year. In fact, here at ESPN.com, since 2005, when our League Manager product, that's where you can play fantasy football online, since that went free in '05, we've never had less than 20% growth any single year, including this year. Now, estimates of the fantasy sports industry have it worth approximately $800 million annually. Like, we hear reports that at least $25 million of DirecTV's Sunday ticket revenue comes from fantasy football players. But probably the best way to quantify the growth of fantasy sports is, well, the existence of me. I'm ESPN's senior fantasy analyst. Like, that's my job. That's my title. 7 years ago, it was unfathomable that just as we have Jaws to analyze the NFL and Bobby Valentine to analyze baseball on ESPN, the worldwide leader in sports employs me to analyze fantasy football. And there are many other guys just like me whose full-time job it is to give advice on how to win a fake game. You know, ESPN offers fantasy programs and segments on SportsCenter, NFL Live, Sunday NFL Countdown, all over ESPN Radio. In fact, all of our signature programs and platforms feature fantasy programming, and we have a 90-minute show every Sunday morning, Fantasy Football Now, dedicated entirely to the sport, and it's the highest-rated program every Sunday on ESPN2. You know, it's not just limited to ESPN. Yahoo, NFL.com and NFL Network, CBS Sports, NBC Sports, Fox Sports, they all have both online and TV programming all around fantasy sports, and specifically fantasy football. To compare it to other sports, here at ESPN.com, fantasy football is king, and it's not close. It's about 5 times more popular than fantasy baseball, and about 6 times more popular than fantasy NBA. I suspect the ESPN numbers are similar to the rest of the industry. You know, probably the biggest boon to fantasy football's growth and popularity is that the major media companies like ESPN have embraced it in such a big way, but also that the leagues have. You know, there was this study in 2003 that was published in the New York Times that found the average football fan watched 3 hours of football a week, all right? But the average fantasy football player watched twice as much. Once the NFL saw that, they got on board in a big way, and now the league requires all stadiums to show fantasy stats. The NFL uses the inventory that they get on their broadcasts with us, CBS, Fox, and NBC to promote their fantasy game on NFL.com. We see fantasy stats scroll past on the ticker. And it's also become very mainstream. It's not just for, you know, dorks. Grandmothers, kids, celebrities, models, you name it, they all play it. In fact, according to the FSTA data, 19% of all men in America and 8% of all women will play some form of fantasy sports this year. And around 75% of those people will play fantasy football. I appreciate all of you giving me a few minutes of your time here. You know, I remember being a freshman in Doc Mason's class at Syracuse University, and Doc said he had a treat for us. A guy that had just graduated the year before was so good, he was already the sports anchor at the Syracuse CBS affiliate. He was going to come talk to us. I learned a lot from Mike Tirico that day, and I'm sure the same is true for everyone watching and listening today. Thanks for the time. Go 'Cuse.